The Greek Coast Guard is in trouble again. It faces serious allegations of brutality and illegal pushbacks against migrants and refugees attempting to cross from from Turkey to Greece, and the accusations include instances of violence, abandonment at sea, neglect. It goes back 20 years, and the Coast Guard has been accused of throwing, specifically, the most recent report, the Coast Guard's been accused of throwing 9 migrants into the sea. This is an instance of a thing called pushbacks, and the BBC claims that over 40 deaths between 2020 and 23 might be connected to the Coast Guard's activities in 15 separate instances. I would indicate these instances are just the tip of the iceberg. Many of them include what in Greece are called pushbacks, what France called pullbacks, forcing migrants back towards Turkey, a violation of international law. Additionally, the BBC report, details instances where migrants were allegedly thrown overboard or placed in unsafe life rafts. Now, the BBC report relies heavily on anonymous witnesses who claim mistreatment by the Greek Coast Guard, and while the accounts are central to the report, the lack of verification regarding the witnesses' identities and backgrounds leaves their motivations and potential biases in dispute. And the Greek Coast Guard has categorically rejected all allegations of illegal activity. Well, they would, wouldn't they? The problem is the Greek Coast Guards have form, and in 2001, Najati Zontal and others were subject to torture by the Greek Coast Guard. He was beaten, subject to mock executions while detained in Crete, and raped. And the case drew international condemnation and led to a ruling by the European Court of Human Rights against Greece, which found the Greek authorities guilty of violating human rights laws. They also demanded that Greece changed its own national law in 4 instances, and none of those instances have been acted upon. So Greece still has a great deal of explaining to do. In that story, there were reports and allegations of the Greek Coast Guard firing shots at the migrant boats, and specifically at that migrant boat, further endangering the lives of those on board. Now, the Greek Coast Guard, for the most part, was made up at that point of a volunteer unit of sort of interns rather than genuine Coast Guard troops, and the people who were involved in the assault and the torture were part of that group, and the case is watertight. So it's very difficult for Greece to turn around and say, well, you don't have witnesses now. We had witnesses then, and we had clear allegations and clear testimony. And I remember calling somebody up. I remember calling up the Greek Coast Guard, and because I was speaking in Greek, and because oddly my Greek has a local accent, partly because I learnt Greek when I was a goat herder on the mountaintops in Sparta, they thought that I was ringing up to support a man called Vardakis, who was one of the torturers. I wasn't, and I'm afraid the person thinking that I was on their side sang like a canary. So I got quite a lot of information that maybe would have been withheld. And the most extraordinary story. The European Court of Human Rights has issued several rulings against Greece for its treatment of migrants, and one notable case involved the deaths of 11 women and children off the island of Pharmaconisi in 2014, where the court found that the Greek authorities had failed to take reasonable measures to prevent the tragedy and hadn't conducted a thorough investigation of the incident. And the court has consistently emphasised the need for Greece to establish an independent and effective border, a mechanism for investigating and addressing allegations of pushbacks and violence against migrants. But the problem is that the Greek border, the Greek maritime border, is enormous. And it's very difficult to regulate, to control, to monitor. The ongoing allegations and accusations against the Greek Coast Guard highlight the significant human rights concerns that have been in existence for 20 years and the urgent need for comprehensive policy changes to protect the rights and safety of migrants. But what we're seeing in Greece is what Farage and his people are frankly promoting in the UK. So there is no other way to protect the channel under the current guidelines without changing the definition of migrants and without changing the idea that migrants can use illegal routes to come to a country and then can legalize themselves by claiming asylum. If that phrasing were to be taken out of the 1951 Refugee Convention, and if consulates were to be placed on the northern borders of Africa and on the borders of Turkey, with their permission, and people and potential migrants were to begin their process of application at those consulates, then I think that would be a way to break the smuggling and the trafficking activity. But simply using Frontex, which is partly policed by the Greek Coast Guard, who had already been found guilty of abuse. They should never have been in Frontex. This is not a way forward. The way that we have tried to police desperate migration over the last 20 years has been folly in the extreme. And we need to change the way we are doing it. And more of the same, more of these deterrents, whether these are people in gunboats or whether these are Rwanda, threats of being sent to Rwanda, these are nonsensical fly-swatting tactics by an equally desperate receiving country. We need to change the legal the legal system, and we need to change the reception, the method of reception. We need to move our borders. And that's not only Britain, it's Europe as well. This is a conversation that needs to take place, and needs to take place on a European or global basis. But it needs to involve the redefinition of the 1951 Refugee Convention, and everything else is simply babble and babble and prejudice, and from people who don't know what they're talking about. And I'm afraid the BBC, I don't understand why they haven't got better details to put forward this story, because those details exist and they simply haven't been talking to the right people. But that's the inadequacy of BBC reporting, maybe.